One of the soldiers in the battalion once said, "Does it ever stop raining in Wales?" And someone replied and said, "Well, the way it seems to work is you get 6 months of rain, then 6 months of winter. What's the problem?" And it is fair to say it is drizzly. It's supposed to be sunny today, it's drizzly. But I'm back at Rogerstone, where I did some original filming when I did the first video about the 756, because I found an awful lot of stuff and an awful lot of information. So it was about a year ago I was here, and I made a video about the 756 US Army Rail Shop Battalion, who were based down the line in Ebbo Junction, where this line, the line up to Evervale, meets the Great Western Main Line in Newport. And they were there because effectively they put together a large number of locos that were shipped from the States over to South Wales. They were taken into the workshops, they were commissioned, they were tested, and they were put into store. And one of the lines they were tested on was this one I'm standing next to. The locomotives were giant S160 American 280s. There were some small tank locomotives, and there were some diesels. And as I've had correspondence with various people from literally around the world, I found a lot more about these soldiers, where they worked, and more to the point, some of the engines they worked on and what happened to them. So let's start with the billets. And to do that, I'm going to switch over to me earlier on today in Caerphilly, because I did mention they were billeted in Caerphilly, but I didn't know where. The place they were billeted was here. This is Pontycwyndy Industrial Estate in Caerphilly, and it used to be a camp for the US Army battalions. It was originally built to house people who had been bombed out from their housing in places like Cardiff and Barry, but it was never used for that. And when the soldiers got here, they found, in comparison to some places, they've been relative luxury. They integrated well into the community of Caerphilly, and it was fair to say they made a mark, very positive impact. And more than one soldier went back to the US with somebody on their arm. Long-term marriages were forged during those times. Not all of them worked out, but there's a wonderful book called The Friendly Invasion, and I'll put a link down there, which tells the story of some of the soldiers and the people that they met. Now, as you can see, it is all modern and all sort of laid out in straight lines, but I've always had a suspicion. When I look at a map of the camp and I look at this building here, you can see it's at an angle, and the front bit looks fairly modern. When you look at this bit at the back, old brickwork, asbestos roofing, look at the shape of the windows. It really does look utilitarian and very, very wartime. And I've always wondered whether this was a very old relic, perhaps, of those days. However, the books from the website and everything else say no, and apparently the only thing that's left is this road up here. And the only thing that can be matched on the map is this road up here. Everything else was apparently demolished, and this is all that's left. After the war, it was used briefly as a prisoner of war camp and then taken over as a council office before they built the estate. But when you look at that building and you look at the fact it's on an angle and you match it up on a map, you can understand why I have my suspicions. What isn't a doubt is the next relic I found. You see, I mentioned the S100 tank locos. These were very, very useful engines, as Thomas would say, and they found work after the war in a number of countries, in Great Britain, in France, in the Netherlands, and all sorts. And one of the customers for them was Yugoslavia, and they went to work at the Yugoslavia Coal Board. Now, of course, Yugoslavia is no more. It's broken up into its component countries, and one of this was Slovenia. And they had a lot of mining in Slovenia, and there was a town called Zagoria. It's spelled Zagoria. And they decided they wanted to commemorate the mining in the area. Why not? We do it in Wales. And so they cosmetically restored one of their tank locos. and they happened to pick an S100. And if you go onto Google Maps and go down to Google Street View, there you will see a US S100 tank locomotive. It came from USA, it went to Wales, to France, to Slovenia, and it's US Army Loco number 4332. One of the ones that went through Ebbw Junction and the 756 was stored up on the sidings near Lambraddock before being shipped off to France for D-Day. Now, I also mentioned alongside the steam locomotives, the 756 also processed diesels. There were General Electric 45 tonners and 75 tonners and some Whitcombs, which I'll come on to in a bit. Tracking down the steam locos have been easy. There's lots of websites with lots of information, but the 45 tonners, a bit of a problem. There was some debate, were they 44s or were they 45s? Turns out they're 44s and they were ballasted to become 45 tonners. But they came over here, they were put through the workshop, rebuilt, piston heads aligned, all this sort of thing, and then run again up and down this little bit of railway to Risca to test them. One ended up in a museum in Connecticut. However, they were a tramway museum and they didn't really have much use for it and sold it. And it ended up in the Belfast and Moosehead Railway in Maine. Now, thank you hugely to Howard Betts, who kindly sent me a couple of photos over. And it would seem, as I said, they were built as 45 tonners and ballasted to 45s for use in Europe. It's preserved, and yes, work is needed, but the museum have every intention of doing so. So if you're in Maine, please pay them a visit, go give them some money. Personally, I think having a Welsh, USA, French flag on the side would be rather nice, but it's good to see at least one of them is preserved. What I wasn't expecting was one still in work. This is 8526. It's not preserved, it's still in operation on a small set of sidings in West Virginia. It's owned by Port Amethyst of Charleston and is still very much in use. Who would have thought one of these 45-ton locomotives that, as I say, passed up this line on test, being driven by a US soldier with a GWR pilot alongside them, who would have thought one of them would still be in operation in the USA today? I'd love to say I found a Welsh Whitcomb, but I haven't. There's a great website called armywhitcombs.info, and it spells out all of them, including the ones that came through Ebbw Junction and the ones that went straight to France and Italy and other places like that. It's a really good website, and I recommend you have a look at it. And there's some great images, including this one, which shows 8122. It's taken at Ebbw Junction. If you check out the GWR tank locomotive on the left, very clearly that's Ebbw. And I was reading a book recently on the Cardiff Railway, and because it talks about the docks and the railway, there's a picture of 10 Whitcombs lined up on the side of Roath Dock, having arrived from America prior to them going down to Ebbw Junction, trying to get a copy of the photo, not having much success at the moment. Now, I mentioned previously the Dutch railways had bought some Whitcombs after the war, and I thought they'd bought the ones from Italy because they were far superior in their build and their area and everything. But they also had some of the ones that came through Newport, and there were 4 that actually saw service after the war, some of them here in the picture. What happened was the US Army had more or less kind of like a fire sale down in Paris and said, come and get them. And the Dutch railways went down and they bought a batch. And this photo shows them being transported across Europe. And this one shows one of them in service. And this was one of the ones that was actually passed through Ebbw Junction, the 756th. One of them was bought for spares and didn't actually have a Dutch railway number, but there were a number of them that worked the railways for some years before they were all scrapped in the 1950s. Now, I mentioned that Storm Train Hospitaller has a Whitcomb which they've painted up in US Army livery. It turns out there's a second one in the Netherlands as well. This is on a line near Apeldoorn, and they have bought it again. I think they bought one of the Italian ones, but they've painted it up in the Dutch railway livery and given it a Dutch railway number. So one country, 2 Whitcombs. I know there's 2 in the States, one in Pennsylvania, one in the Trolley Museum near New York, and a couple on a plinth. And before anyone said anything, yes, I know there's also one preserved in Italy and one on a plinth in Italy as well. So this class of locomotives, which was fairly unique, the Whitcomb 65 tonners were fairly unique. There's a number preserved that you can go see. I did a double take when I saw this photograph because I thought Whitcomb, and when you look at it you'd think from the other photos I've shown Whitcomb, and yet it's not. After the war, a French company called the Railway, Naval and Construction Company got hold of the plans legally and were managed to get a load of spares and effectively built 10 locomotives which were identical to the 65-ton Whitcombs, not with the original engines, I will say. They were used on a railway called the Chemin de Fer de la Héroute, and it came about because obviously they had this big sale in Paris and they were able to get their hands on some stuff. 9 of them were scrapped, but one of them entered preservation. It's owned privately, and it's on a tourist train railway in the south of France called Le Train Rouge. And I have mailed them to say, are they there? And again, nobody's answering. There might be something wrong with my email, you know, I need to check that. However, coming back to this locomotive, it's the other one we need to be looking at. Mention the GE 75 tonners that came through Rubber Junction. That green locomotive there is one of them. Now I will admit these 75 tonners are a bit of a mystery. There were only ever 10 built, and they were built to Great British loading gauge, British Railways loading gauge. So were they destined for operation over here? Likewise, they came very late through Eber Junction. They were the last locomotives they commissioned, the last to be tested on this bit of railway. So what was their purpose? Why were they here? Whatever it was, they ended up in France, and they ended up afterwards, as I said, all being purchased. So in the last video, I said they were in the Société Générale de Chemin de Fer Économique, which was subsequently taken over by SNCF, the French railway company, and they went to a spot hire company called CFTA. They used them in service, loaned them to small railways around France, and renumbered them 4028 to 4037 to match their build numbers. Now, I know 5 of them were definitely scrapped, and we know of 3 because I've mentioned them before. 4022, 4036 are at the Chemin de Fer Touriste de Rennes, and 4033 is the Tram Touriste Guit Marseillais. However, thanks to various emails and contacts, I've been able to trace 2 more. There were 2 that were sent to a railway at San Sebastian, one of which was scrapped and the other which is intact, but I think you would agree with me, this ain't going anywhere in a hurry. There are some people who are quite adequate, this is 4030, but Alexandra, thank you very much for letting me use your photos and for giving me the information. This gentleman crawled underneath it and got the chassis number. So we know this was 4029, which was the US Army number 7229. And again, one of the ones who passed through Eber Junction. So merci beaucoup, Alexandra, for that. There is also this locomotive, which is at Sebra on a line to an eco museum. This photo was taken a couple of years ago. And the museum have found it's a little bit too heavy for their line, so not quite sure what's going to happen to them. So it would seem there's 4 of these 75 tonners intact, plus a wreck, which out of 10 locomotives that were ever built, is quite a unique survival rate. But there is one last twist with the 75 tonners. I want you to look at this photo. I mentioned CFTA supply locomotives to work on various projects. These GE75 tonners have got exhaust catchers on them. Why would you have exhaust catchers on a locomotive? Because you're going into a tunnel and you're going to work into a tunnel. Which tunnel? Yeah, these wartime 75-ton locomotives, ex-US Army, genuinely worked on the Channel Tunnel. I wonder if anybody realised that these World War II veterans were working on one of the greatest European construction projects of the 20th century. So what happens next? Well, apart from getting into the dry, I think this is probably it as far as videos on the 756. If I find any 75 tonners, any more 75 tonners, which I doubt, or I find any more 45 tonners, I'll be posting them up on my Instagram, so please follow me on that. It's been a fascinating journey. We're talking to a lot of people from all around the world And genuinely, I would say, merci beaucoup, danku, dankeschön, thank you, and diolch to everybody who's given me information. I would love to see some sort of commemoration. The 756 were only here for about 8 months, but the difference they made in the work they did in the logistics in World War II was phenomenal. Sadly, the local railway company have gone to schools to name all their new trains, which I get, because had they asked adults, I think we would have come up with Trainee McTrain phase or rail replacement bus, because that's the sort of level of humour we have in this country. But I'd like to see someone somewhere naming something to remember this battalion, because the work they did was phenomenal, and I don't think it should be forgotten. Unless I get invited to a naming ceremony or I find something else substantial, that's it from the 756. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and if you do stumble across a 45 tonner along the way, let me know. Until next time.